On July the 16th, 1945, the world would change forever. J. Robert Oppenheimer was a brilliant physicist and a key figure in the development of the atomic bomb, but his legacy is a complicated one, marked by both scientific achievement and a great moral conflict. Born in New York City in 1904, Oppenheimer was the son of wealthy Jewish immigrants. He showed exceptional intelligence from an early age and was interested in science and mathematics. He majored in chemistry and physics at Harvard, and then he came to England to study at Cambridge. His childhood was troubled as he couldn't relate to other children, leaving him isolated with not many friends. The awkwardness would continue in England as we have numerous stories of Oppenheimer's game struggling around the ladies, from the time he watched a couple kissing on the train, and upon the man getting off the train leaving his wife or girlfriend alone, Oppenheimer would decide to pounce on her, trying to get a kiss for himself. Upon being pushed away by the woman, he would be left sobbing on the floor of the train. We have a number of other stories where Oppenheimer was clumsy in the lab, known for knocking over test tubes and being very unbearable to work with. There's even one story where he tried to kill one of his professors by planting a poisoned apple in his office. It's quite clear that Oppenheimer was a troubled man, and this trouble would continue for most of his life. Upon his return to the US in 1929, he began teaching physics at the University of California in Berkeley. In 1933, Oppenheimer became a professor of physics at the California Institute of Technology. Oppenheimer was a brilliant scientist and made significant contributions to the field of theoretical physics. He was especially interested in quantum mechanics and the study of subatomic particles. In the 30s, he worked with other physicists, including Enrico Fermi, to study nuclear fission, the process by which an atom nucleus splits into two smaller nuclei. However, when World War II broke out, Oppenheimer's talents were put to use in a much different way. He was recruited to lead a top-secret research project aimed at the possibility of using nuclear fission to develop a new weapon of unprecedented power, the atomic bomb. It all began in 1939 when Albert Einstein wrote a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, warning him of the potential for an atomic bomb in the hands of Nazi Germany. The letter set into motion a chain of events that led to the creation of the Manhattan Project. By 1942, Oppenheimer was appointed the director of the Manhattan Project, this top-secret government program that would develop the atomic bomb. Oppenheimer brought together a team of scientists and engineers to work on the project. They worked in secret locations across the US, including Los Alamos in New Mexico. The work was grueling and dangerous, and the scientists faced many challenges as they embarked on a race against time. In his personal life, his struggle with women seemed to come to an end in 1936. He began dating a woman called Jean Tatlock, who would introduce him to politics. Now, Jean and Robert would frequent dinner parties of someone called Ernest Lawrence, who was a physicist who would also end up working on the Manhattan Project. These dinner parties were often frequented by members of the American Communist Party, and while it seemed Oppenheimer never joined the USCP, by frequenting these parties he ended up having a file written on him by the FBI. After breaking up with Jean in 1940, Oppenheimer would marry Kitty Puning, who was actually a member of the USCP. As I mentioned earlier, while Oppenheimer himself never actually joined the Communist Party, Oppenheimer did pass money to other left-wing causes by the way of people who were acquaintances of Communist Party members. Another important side note is a damning conversation that Oppenheimer would have in early 1943 with an old friend from France, Hawkins Chevaleret. Now, Chevaleret argued that it is unfair that the US was sharing the Manhattan Project research with the UK and not with their other allies, the Soviets, who were doing so much of the fighting and dying against the Nazis in the East. Oppenheimer did one very wise thing, but also one very foolish thing. He said to his friend, "No, I can't be sharing this classified information." However, he failed to report the conversation to his superiors. Now, the reason why all of this is relevant will be made clear later on, so back to the science. Creating an atomic bomb required highly enriched uranium and plutonium. Scientists worked tirelessly to overcome the immense technical hurdles in order to produce these materials on a massive scale. Finally, on July 16, 1945, the world witnessed the first successful test of an atomic bomb, known as the Trinity test. It took place in the New Mexico desert and marked a turning point in human history. Less than a month after the Trinity test, atomic bombs were dropped on Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The devastation was unimaginable. The bombs killed over 200,000 people and led to Japan's surrender, effectively ending World War II. For Oppenheimer, the aftermath of the bombing was a time of intense introspection. He had created a weapon of unimaginable power and had just put that power into the hands of the US government.
We knew the world would not be the same. Few people laughed. Few people cried. Most people were silent. I remembered the line from the Hindu scripture, the Bhagavad Gita. Vishnu is trying to persuade the prince that he should do his duty, and to impress him takes on his multi-armed form and says, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." I suppose we all thought that one way or another.
After the bombs were dropped, Oppenheimer was hailed a hero. He was printed on magazine covers saying, "This is the man who won us the war." Now, he got to meet with Harry Truman, the president, 9 days after the bomb dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Now, he told the president in the Oval Office that he feels like he has blood on his hands. Now, Truman's response was, "Never mind, it will come out in the wash." And as soon as Oppenheimer left, he said to his aides, "I never want to see that son of a bitch in my office again. Damn, if he doesn't have half as much blood on his hands as I have." And then he would go around saying that he had a visit from some crybaby scientist. After the bomb was dropped, one of the physicists, Edward Teller, who worked on the Manhattan Project, thinks that America should go further and create bigger, more powerful bombs. Now, Oppenheimer, of course, disagrees and thinks destruction is enough and the world doesn't need to see a weapon that could do more damage. Over the next couple of weeks after the meeting with Truman, J. Edgar Hoover, the director of the FBI, sent Oppenheimer's FBI file to the president. Hoover claims that they're pretty sure Oppenheimer was a communist member and still has ties to communism. However, there isn't actually any evidence of Oppenheimer being a communist member himself, as I mentioned earlier. Over the next 8 years, the FBI would generate 1,000 pages of wiretaps and transcripts on Oppenheimer, and they still never proved that he was a commie or sharing secrets with the Soviets, as they feared. But this would be just the beginning of his troubles. In the years that followed, Oppenheimer would struggle with his conscience over the role of developing nuclear weapons. So he began to speak out against nuclear testing and the arms race, arguing that the United States should not continue to pursue with such dangerous weapons. His views put him at odds with many in the government and the military, who saw nuclear weapons as a necessity for national security. In 1947, Oppenheimer was called before a congressional committee to testify about his past communist ties. Oppenheimer denied any communist affiliation, but the investigations would further damage his reputation. By August 1949, the Soviets tested their first nuclear bomb in Kazakhstan. Now, Klaus Fuchs, who was a physicist who worked on the Manhattan Project, actually leaked Manhattan Project information to the Soviets. So there was a real fear in the air that physicists were leaking things to the Soviets. By 1951, Edward Teller, the physicist who rivals Oppenheimer and wants to make bigger, better hydrogen bombs, comes to the FBI and says that he will do anything to see Oppenheimer lose his security clearance and be taken off all government boards. Now, in 1953, Oppenheimer gave a lecture to the Council of Foreign Relations, and he says the age of secrecy of atom bombs must come to an end. We must share all the science we have with the Russians, be honest with the American people, that we cannot win a nuclear war. He says during the lecture, "We and the Soviet Union are like two scorpions in a bottle, each capable of killing each other, but only at the cost of its own life." Another rival of Oppenheimer who supports Teller's claims of bigger, better nuclear bombs, fears that President Eisenhower will hear this lecture and agree with Oppenheimer. So what does he do? He contacts the FBI and claims Oppenheimer is a commie and has been in cahoots with the Soviets all along. Purely baseless claims.
There's a little snake in the grass right there.
But later that year, Oppenheimer makes another foolish error. He travels to Europe to meet his old friend Hawkins Chevaleret, a known European communist. Now, of course, Oppenheimer's tailed by the FBI to this dinner meeting, and Chevaleret will be the straw that breaks the camel's back for Oppenheimer. While it seems clear that based on the evidence, Oppenheimer was never actually a member of the Communist Party and certainly never sold or gave away secrets to the Soviet Union, he did supply all his rivals and critics with plenty of ammunition to bury him. In 1954, Oppenheimer's career took a dark turn. He was forced to testify before Congress yet again. He was grilled about his political views and his role in the Manhattan Project. Oppenheimer was accused of giving this sensitive information to the Soviet Union and being sympathetic to communist causes. His critics argued that he was a security risk and he should be removed from his position of influence. Yet again, Oppenheimer strongly denied all charges against him. He insisted that he had never given any sensitive information to the Soviet Union and he was not a communist sympathizer. In the court hearings, the judges voted 2-1 in favour of Oppenheimer losing his security clearance. Interestingly, the judge that voted in favour of Oppenheimer keeping his security clearance said there's no new evidence for the FBI or the US government that they didn't originally know when hiring Oppenheimer and handing him his security clearance back in the 1940s. And I think this statement pretty much sums up the witch hunt on a man that tried to expose the dangers of his own creation. The loss of his security clearance effectively ended his career in government service and made him a pariah in many circles. However, he continued to speak out against the arms race and nuclear weapons. He was a vocal advocate for nuclear disarmament, and his views influenced many people in the United States and around the world. Oppenheimer's struggles with the government and his own conscience continued until his death in 1967. However, his legacy lives on. His legacy of one of both scientific achievement, advocacy for peace, and he remains a complex and fascinating figure in American history. Oppenheimer's struggles with his conscience and his advocacy for peace demonstrate that scientists and engineers have a responsibility to consider the social and ethical implications of their work. Today, the ethical and social implications of scientific technological advancements continue to be a pressing concern. New technologies such as AI, gene editing, and biotechnology raise complex ethical and social questions. It's important for scientists and engineers to consider these questions and to engage in a public dialogue about the moral implications of their work. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more interesting films like this one.